I can analyze a social studies text using the Individuals and Societies bookmark. So in Individuals and Societies, you've been learning about the 3 Chinese philosophies: Confucianism, Legalism, and Taoism. We're going to start today by talking about the philosophy of Confucianism. All right, historians, for this lesson today, you're going to need your What Makes a Good Leader handout with Confucius at the top. You're going to need your bookmark, and you're going to need 3 highlighters: a yellow, a pink, a green, and a pencil. Make sure you have all 3 of those things. The first thing you need to do is take your pink highlighter and highlight the Headnote and Attribution section of your bookmark, just like I did. When you're done with that, you're going to move over to your text, and I'm going to color code it. So you notice this says Headnote. Here I've highlighted in pink where it says Headnote, and I made a little note to myself on the side that said Headnote and highlighted it in pink. You need to do that as well. At the bottom, attribution, that means who it's attributed to, who people say wrote it. And so I wrote attribution on the side and I highlighted it in pink, so I know that this is the attribution. So we have the Headnote, which is at the top, it's the head, and the attribution, which is at the bottom, which tells us who it's attributed to, who wrote it. Next, you're going to outline the as you read the source box in yellow, please. Then you'll move over here, and I did the same thing. I put on the side yellow, and I wrote source, because this is the source. This is the actual words that were written that we're going to be reading. So make sure you've done the outline in the box, you've written source, and you've highlighted. If you guessed we're going to do the after you read in green, you were right. Make sure to highlight on your bookmark after you read in green, and then over here after you read in green too, because this is what we'll fill out after we read. I'm going to start by reading my bookmark, the As You Read, Headnote, and Attribution. I'm going to be looking for 1, 2, 3, 4 questions to ask and answer. Who said, drew, or wrote this? When and where was it said, drawn, or written? What type of source is this? Why was it said, drawn, or written? Or for whom was it created? Now I'm going to go to my Headnote, and I'm going to read looking for the answers to those 4 questions. Source 1, Confucius. Confucius is a belief system or religion that first appeared in northern China. It was founded by Confucius sometimes between 551 and 479 BCE. Confucius lived during a time of violent warfare, unstable governments, disorder, and suffering. Confucius believed that order and peace would improve people's lives. He wrote his ideas down as sayings in the Analects, and people after him tried to spread his teaching. Here is one saying from Confucius about leadership. And now I'm going to skip the source because remember, I'm just going to read the Headnote and the attribution. Source. Excerpt, that means piece of text, excerpt, modified from Edward Hinton's 2013 translation of the Analects. The above is a saying Confucius wrote sometime between 551 and 479 BCE in what is now northern China. He wrote sayings like this to teach people how to live in peace. Let's go and look at our first question. Who said, drew, or wrote this? Look in your text and see if you can answer that question. If you said Confucius, you're right. It says here, the above, that means the source, is a saying Confucius wrote. So I'm going to highlight that. Confucius wrote. Make sure you're highlighting that as well. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to write Confucius. I'm looking at the spelling. C-O-N-F-U-C-I-U-S. Confucius wrote this. Check. When and where was it said, drawn, or written? If you looked over here and you saw that it was written sometime between 551 and 479 BCE in northern China, you were correct. Notice how I'm highlighting these, and I'm going to write it here. 551 through 479 BCE. That's when and where northern China. When and where. Wow, so this is a really old text that we're going to read. We haven't even read it yet, but look at how much information we know just from the Headnote and Attribution. We know that Confucius wrote it. We know he wrote it a really long time ago, over 2,000 years ago, and we know he wrote it in northern China. Our next question is, what type of source is this? Well, here I can see it's a translation from the Analects, because he wrote it in Chinese, right, originally. But Edward Hinton had to translate it into English. So what type of source is it? I'm going to write text, because it's not a picture. And I'm going to write translation, because originally it was written in Chinese. Check. And I'm going to go over here to highlight my text evidence. Why was it said, drawn, or written? Or for whom was it created? See if you can answer that. If you looked over here and you said that he wrote it to teach people how to live in peace, you're correct. So here I'm going to write to teach people how to live in peace. So now I've done the Headnote, I've done the Attribution, and I already know a lot of information. Now I'm going to go ahead and read the source. Remember, the source is the actual words that Confucius wrote. So the Headnote and the Attribution were written pretty recently to help us understand what this is, because it's just a tiny excerpt or piece. But these are the only words on the page that were actually written by Confucius thousands of years ago in northern China. If you use government to show people how to live and use punishment to keep people honest, they will avoid punishment and will not feel shame. But if you lead them by being honest and celebrating goodness, and if you use routines to keep them loyal, they will feel shame if they do something wrong and correct themselves. Let's look at the questions we need to be answering again. What people are mentioned? See if you can see what people are mentioned here. So using I, you, we, they. If you notice that he was using words like you and they, this tells me that he's talking to people who lived back then, and he's probably trying to give the people who make the government advice, right? Because he's saying, hey, listen, if you use government this way, then they the people that you are ruling will do this. So I think the you is the government, the president or whoever was in charge, the emperor, you learned about that, government, or the emperor. And when he's saying they, he's talking about the people who live in China. All right, historians, we're so close. Now we're moving on to after you read. So you're going to need your, you guessed it, green marker. How reliable is this source for the central question we're trying to answer? Hold up. Our central question, where can you find that? I'll give you a hint. It's on your handout right above where it says source. Go ahead and type it. What we need to do now is answer how reliable is this source for the central question, what makes a good leader, we are trying to answer. When we say reliable, we mean can we trust it? So it's reliable because, or it's not reliable because. Well, I'm looking over here and I'm seeing one thing that makes it reliable is that this is actually from the time where Confucius lived. So I'm going to write that that's something that it makes it reliable. Written in ancient China by Confucius. Can never remember how to spell that one. One thing that might make me wonder if it's reliable is that it's a translation, right? So it was originally written in Chinese and it needed to be translated to English. Now it's probably pretty reliable because it was modified by Edward Hinton, and usually translations are pretty accurate, but you might want to wonder about that. You always want to make sure that translations are correct. So if I'm over here, I'm noticing that these are the same questions. It's reliable because it's written in ancient China by Confucius, so that will help me understand what people thought made a good leader way back then. One thing that might make it not so reliable is that it's a translation. It's probably okay, but we're always trying to be very conscious. What parts of the source help you think about the central question, which is what makes a good leader? Draw boxes around these parts. So I'm looking over here, and I think being honest, because that's really what he thought made a good leader. Because remember, he's writing this to you, the emperor. He's saying, hey, emperor, you should be honest. You should use routines. You should celebrate goodness if you want to be a good emperor. So I see those as being the key ideas about what Confucius thinks makes a good leader. So now let's double check. We filled out our bookmark. We got a lot of information before we even started reading the actual text from the Headnote and Attribution. We read the actual text, the source, the actual words by Confucius. There's only about 2 sentences. And then after the text, we took some time to reflect on what was the main point, if it was reliable, and how we can use this to help us think about the central question. Now you're going to have a chance to try it on your own, but this time, instead of looking at Confucianism for the idea of what makes a good leader, we're going to look at legalism. Get your materials ready. Put each page on the table in front of you. Use the highlighter to show the relationship between the graphic organizer and the text, just like we did with Source 1. This is what it should look like. If you need to make any changes, do it now. Read the Headnote and Attribution. Highlight any words that help you answer the questions in pink. You should have similar information to this highlighted, and you should have written something similar to this on your bookmark. If you didn't, that's okay, but do it now. Read the source. Highlight any text that helps you answer the yellow questions on your bookmark with your yellow highlighter. You should have highlighted similar text evidence to this and written something similar on the As You Read section. Notice that you don't always fill out every box in the As You Read, and that's okay. Every text's a little different. Answer the questions in After You Read and highlight any text evidence in green that helps you. You should have something similar to this written. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but you should make sure that you mention the author's name, excuse my pronunciation, Shang Wang, and you want to make sure that you're talking about those harsh punishments and how what he really wants is for people not to be breaking the law. You analyzed 2 really difficult social studies texts today using the Individuals and Societies bookmark, and you were able to find out a lot of information about what people in China thought about what makes a good leader. Congratulations.